All right, hope everyone's doing great. Today we're going to talk about the left versus right and bias detection, propaganda detection. I want to make sure that you don't fall prey to the games that they play. My name is Jason W. Hoyt, host of the Liberty Restoration Show. The only place you can get every episode is at jasonwhoyt.com. That's jasonwhoyt.com. The thing is, big tech will ban the show at some point. There's going to be episodes that YouTube's probably going to remove. There's going to be topics I talk about that Facebook is going to remove. The only place you're going to get them is at jasonwhoyt.com, so make sure you check that out today. The reason why I'm going to talk about this today, left versus right, we're going to define a lot of terms. I've seen so many people use these terms, just throw them out. They don't really fully understand them. They just heard them and then they use them and then the media uses them to paint pictures in your mind and then to blur definitions and change definitions over time to try to sway you ahead of time. I'm going to show you a lot of that media bias stuff here in a little bit, but I want to go through some definitions. Today's episode is at jasonwhoyt.com/004. jasonwhoyt.com/004. The show notes will be in there. Let's dig into this here. Split screen right there. Left versus right defined. And what we're going to do is go into how to spot media bias. That's going to be coming up. But when you think about left versus right, if someone is further to the left than somebody else, what are we talking about? It's a relative position, and we're measuring something. If somebody is over here versus over here, we're measuring something. I hear it all the time. Well, he's a leftist, far left, far right, right winger. You know, they use these terms, but what are we measuring? Frankly put, we're measuring the degree to which one promotes government control. If someone over here promotes this level of government control, it's not as much as somebody over here that promotes this level of government control. Government control over what? It's over people's rights, over property, over economy, and institutions. That's what we're talking about. And this is what I find fascinating. People who believe in more government control, typically it's never about government control over stuff they're doing. It's always about government control over stuff that they over there are doing. Nobody promotes government control over my life or over their own life. Nobody does that. Or some people do, I guess. Getting into that psychology, I really want to understand why people do that. And I don't think that a lot of people do. They don't think about consequences. We'll dig into that over the coming weeks and months. But it's government control over people's rights, property, economy, institutions, and it's usually promoting government control over somebody else's rights and property, economy, and institutions. And the excuses that they use, oh, it's for the children, right? We've heard that. Oh, it's for the environment. We've heard that. Oh, it's to protect consumers. We've heard that. Let's dig into some definitions. The far left promotes total government control. Totalitarian is 100%. 100% government control. That's the scale here. That's what we're measuring. The far left promotes 100% totalitarian government control. The far right, way down the other end of the scale, the far right promotes zero government control, which you know is anarchy. That's 0%. So everybody else is in between 100%. Let me make sure I do this right on the visual. And if you guys are listening on the audio, I have a video slide presentation here that provides all these definitions and everything that I'm talking through. Go to jasonwhoyt.com/004 to get all that, to see all of this. So again, far right promotes zero government control, anarchy. Okay. Let's dig into some definitions. Totalitarian, relating to a person of government that is centralized, central planners, right? And dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. Complete, 100%, right? Communism, political theory derived from Karl Marx, Marxism, right? If you're a Marxist, remember BLM, the leaders of BLM, they said in those videos that surfaced that they are trained Marxists. Interesting. Advocating class war. We've heard that for time and time again. Oh, the rich, loopholes for the rich, and they pay their fair share and all this kind of stuff. And that's all out of communism. That's all Marxism, communism, leading to a society in which all property, remember that list, where the government determines people's rights, their property, institutions, economy, is publicly owned, right? And each person works and is paid according to their abilities or needs. That's the whole Karl Marxism thing. Fascism. We've heard a lot about fascism. Antifa are supposed to be anti-fascists, right? Supposed to be. We'll dig into that sometime. Political philosophy or regime that exalts nation. Here's what's fascinating. I'm using these definitions. A lot of these screenshots are from Wikipedia. I know that Wikipedia is open sourced and anybody can go in there and edit definitions and all that. But definitions change over time. And they start throwing in little words purposefully to start clouding issues. And I'll show you some of that in the media screenshots that I have later. But exalts nation and often race, not always, but it's often, they have to throw that in there. Above the individual. In our country, we're supposed to recognize and protect individual rights, but fascism, they put nation above the individual, and it stands for a centralized, autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Forcible suppression of opposition. Isn't that what Antifa does? Through intimidation and forcible suppression of opposition? Interesting. Progressive, which is not progressive. One that is progressive. Okay, one believing in moderate political change. They had to throw that word in there. Moderate political change. So it's not scary. So anybody, I think the first time for me that I really heard the word progressive, Glenn Beck was really talking about it a lot. And these progressives, we got to watch out for these progressives. And for me, starting to hear that, progress, and especially social improvement by government action. That's the key right there, by government action. And for me, I started to dig into and understand progress and what they were really saying. What progressives say is because of progress. Because society has progressed since the days of the horse and buggy, and we shouldn't listen to the founding fathers because we've progressed since then, right? That's what they say. I would offer that every single progressive policy since the founding of this country is actually a leap backwards in time. It's actually regressive. It's actually medieval. It's actually central planning where it's done by government action. It is not progress. The most advanced form of government that exists today, the most advanced, is one that recognizes self-rule, limited government. That's our constitutional republic and our system of government here in the United States. So I would say that the U.S. Constitution is the most progressive, the most advanced. Everything else since then has been a giant leap backwards in time through central planners. I could do a whole show on that, and I will someday. Liberal. This is the most crazy. When you dig into the definitions here, especially on Wikipedia, the open source, tell me, when you think of liberal, what's the first thing you think of? Who do you think of? Nancy Pelosi is a liberal, right? Oh, she's a liberal. People say that all the time. Well, look at these definitions. Emphasizing intellectual liberty, and the spiritual and B. Let's look at B. A theory in economics emphasizing individual freedom from restraint. What? Nancy Pelosi emphasizing individual freedom from restraint and usually based on free competition, the free market, Nancy Pelosi? Really? Self-regulating market and the gold standard? When you read that definition, you don't think of Nancy Pelosi. So why is she called a liberal? Look at this. In C, in the definition here, a political philosophy based on belief in progress. There's that word, of course. Progress. Progressive. The advancement of society. We have progressed, right? The essential goodness of the human race and the autonomy of the individual. Really, mask mandate Nancy? Really? The autonomy of the individual? And standing for the protection of political and civil liberties. Really? Mask mandate Nancy? Such a philosophy that considers, here we go, government as a crucial instrument for amelioration of social inequities. Ooh. Inequities, equity, inequities, equal. There's a lot of play on those words going through the media right now. We're going to dig into that at some point, not today. But the only piece of this that really reflects Nancy Pelosi is that considers government as a crucial instrument. Everything else, why is that definition there? Well, there's a huge difference between liberal and classic liberal. Thomas Jefferson was considered, or is considered, a classic liberal back in the day. He believed in individual freedom, self-regulating markets based on free competition. He believed in all those things. That's part of the classic liberal definition. That is not Nancy Pelosi. So the reason why these definitions are like it's propaganda. It's to steer people. Because if Nancy Pelosi gets labeled a liberal and somebody who doesn't really understand goes and looks up the word, oh, she believes in freedom. Yeah. BS. She doesn't. She is a modern day liberal, not a classic liberal. And here they are in the definitions, muddling and confusing all of that. Okay, moderate. When you think of moderate, who do you think of? Mitt Romney, right? Moderate. He's moderate. He's avoiding extremes, as it says in A. Down here in part 4, it says professing and characterized by political or social beliefs that are not extreme. He is not extreme. He's a moderate. Well, moderate, it doesn't actually say what they believe in. It just says that they're not extreme. So he may be a moderate. He may not be extreme, but he believes in progressive, socialist, and even some communist policies. So see how they muddle. He's moderate. He's not extreme. Well, he does speak out, and he is for these different policies. Anyways, conservative. In part 2 here is disposition in politics to preserve what is established. All right, a political philosophy based on tradition and social stability, stressing established institutions. I'm going to dig into this over the coming weeks and months. I believe there's an awakening going on amongst the people about established institutions. And conservatives out there, all my conservative friends out there, based on the definition, we're trying to preserve these institutions, but you got to understand and realize and wake up to the fact that a lot of these institutions have been hijacked and taken over. So be careful what you're trying to preserve. That's a huge, huge wake-up call. We need to be careful in what we're trying to preserve because we need to dig into them, expose the hijacking that's been going on. Okay, and preferring gradual development to abrupt change. Such a philosophy calling for lower taxes, limited government regulation of business. Well, wait a minute. Tell me who is not for lower. Well, I know a bunch of people who are not for lower taxes. Well, lower taxes on me, but higher taxes on the other guy. It's always the other guy. Right? Limited government regulation of business and investing. Limited, not calling for more regulation on businesses, but conservatives want limited government regulation of business and investing, strong national defense, and individual financial responsibility for personal needs. Why isn't everyone a conservative? Why isn't everyone trying to preserve those principles? Libertarian. And this is small L libertarian, not the capital L for Libertarian Party. An advocate of the doctrine of free will. Interesting. Isn't God advocate of the doctrine of free will? I wonder, for another day, I wonder if God regrets the whole free will thing, because look how crazy people are. I'm sure he doesn't, but anyways, that's for another day. We'll talk about that. Part 2 here, a person who upholds the principles of individual liberty, especially of thought and action. Tell me who is not for individual liberty of thought and action. Well, there's a whole bunch of people. But why liberty? Libertarian, liberty. Why don't more people believe in liberty? I don't understand that. Here's another definition I found. A person who believes that people should be allowed to do and say what they want without any interference from the government. Well, there's a line there, right? There's a line there. Like the purpose of government is to protect rights. And so anyways, we'll dig into that in just a little bit. But why aren't more people libertarians? That's what I'm curious about. Small L libertarians. And then way in the spectrum, anarchy, absence of government, zero government control, a state of lawlessness, political disorder due to the absence of governmental authority. All right, so let's put these on the scale. Let's try to understand this here. Left versus right. Again, the degree to which government controls property, people's rights, economy, institutions. Far left, totalitarian, that's 100% government control. The far right, 0% government control, and everybody is in between. We've got communists, you got your fascists here, and whether or not communists and fascists could be rotated there, I'm not really sure who has, because again, it's about rights, property, economy, institutions, so both of those are probably pretty high, and I don't know if one is more than the other. You got socialist, and here's the warning. You got progressive, liberal. The warning is this. Once somebody goes to more government control, it is a slippery slope from liberal to progressive to socialist to fascist to communist to totalitarian. And I know everybody says, oh, it'll never happen here. Blah. It's happening. Wake up. It is completely happening. Well, it's for the children. We need to have the government control that. That's for the environment. You know, it's the latest emergency. That they're going to start declaring emergencies for climate change, and that maybe the COVID thing last year was a test. Who is going to agree with emergency powers suspending the Constitution? It's like George Bush. I got to suspend the free market to save the free market. These are all a test, and now it's a slippery slope. Now they're going to declare emergency for climate, and that's going to give governors and the president, the executive orders, the ability to start mandating this and that, and they're going to suspend the Constitution. I know. I'm crazy. Got your tinfoil hat on, right? But it's happening. You just got to wake up to it. There's moderate. There's conservative. There's libertarian. Here's a question for you. That's the left versus right. Here's the question for you. What is the proper role of government? We've talked about that numerous times. I talk about that in my book, I Choose Liberty. In the Declaration of Independence, that's why I have DOI on the screen. In the Declaration of Independence, not only did it recognize that our rights come from God, we are endowed by our Creator with certain, not uncertain, certain inalienable rights, that among these, not the complete list, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Originally written life, liberty, and property. And actually, second part of the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment says no person shall be held to answer. Well, that's the first part of the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's where that phrase comes from. But then the next part of that in the Declaration of Independence, it says, and to secure these rights, which rights are natural God-given rights, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The proper role of government is to protect our rights. That's it. It's not to control people's rights, control property, control economy, control institutions. That's not the proper role of government. It's just to protect our rights. We say land of the free in the national anthem for a reason. Don't we? Are we the land of the free or not? Because if we're asking the government to control people's rights, to control their property to any degree whatsoever, and it's all a slippery slope. Once the devil gets his foot in the door, it's going to eventually be wide open. 1913, they passed the 16th Amendment, which is the direct taxation of income from the federal government. How in the world did they convince the American people that was a good idea? I'm sure it was that class warfare. Don't worry, it's only going to be in the 1%. We're only going to tax them. We're only going to tax them a little bit. You just got to pay their fair share to pay for this stuff, right? And here we are over 100 years later with 73,000 pages of tax code dictating and manipulating and steering behavior through the tax code. How does that happen? It's a slippery slope. You get their foot in the door. Oh, it's only against them. It's only 1%. And then here we are. Look down the slide there. From conservative to moderate to liberal, progressive, socialist, fascist, communist, totalitarian. So if the proper role of government is to secure these rights, and if we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, tranquility, the preamble, the thing in the Constitution, we formed the government with the Constitution. We limited its jurisdiction. Article 1, Section 8, for example, the legislature, there's only 18 powers enumerated to Congress. We limit how they can interact with some of our natural God-given rights in the Bill of Rights. 10th Amendment says if something is not listed here, it's up to the states or it's still retained by the people. So the proper role of government is to protect their rights. Here's how they can do it. Where do you think on this scale the Constitution sits? We just looked at all the definitions. The degree to which people control, or the degree to which government controls people's rights, property, economy, institutions. Where do you think the Constitution sits? I think it sits somewhere between libertarian and conservative. The reason I say that is because there's a number of libertarians out there who will argue that the Constitution does too much, it gives too much power, so they believe these different things, that the Constitution does too much, has too much government control. And actually, I see a lot, and I agree a lot with what they say. I also know some conservative friends there who, maybe they support Social Security. And, that general welfare clause, that bucket, the catch-all, that was never meant to be, that they can justify, Social Security there. So that's where I think the Constitution sits. So everybody else who suggests a program, a government program, a new law, or whatever, new agency that controls people's rights, property, economy, institutions, more regulations, whether they be moderate, liberal, progressive, socialist, fascist, communist, totalitarian, whichever degree to which they promote control or suggest control, I think they're acting against the Constitution. Who's the insurrectionist now? And those people who are in office swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Could they be held liable for perjury, trying to overthrow the Constitution? For lying under oath? Perjury, right? I don't know, but that's where the Constitution sits. So now when you hear the words far left and you hear the words far right, how do you guys actually, in what context do you hear the word far right? It's always in the media, and they try to say far right extremist. That's the words they use to paint a picture. And most middle America is like, well, I'm more in the middle. I'm not a right winger. I'm not a leftist. I'm more in the middle. So when they say middle, and then they put in a label of right wing or far right or something like that. Well, that's not me. I have to discredit them. I have to not listen to them because they put that label on there. Well, look where the Constitution is. The Constitution is a far right document. Is the Constitution political? That's partisan. I always tell people I'm a centrist. I'm centered on the Constitution. Aren't you? I'm an American. So here's how to spot media bias. If you watch any media, know it's biased. Okay, let's dig a little bit further, but that's a good general rule of thumb. Remember the definition of fascism. Here's the highlights. And this is what they do. They bleed this word and this word here, and they start to change definitions and usage, and they confuse by, when I say bleed over, it's like this gray area. There's some overlap now. Fascism. Remember, it exalts nation. Remember that. And often race, of course, above the individual. Which is interesting because we're supposed to have individual rights. Fascism exalts nation and often race above the individual, stands for centralized government headed by a dictator, blah, 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 forcible suppression of opposition. Remember these words. Populist. We've heard this word really in the last several years with Donald Trump, and I know Steve Bannon. I think he's brilliant. I'd call him a friend. I'm going to contact him at some point and have him on the show and really talk about this. Not to debate it, not that I disagree with him. I just don't think that the use of the word helps. It's just my opinion because it has a connotation. When you say populist, because prior, I've been involved in politics for a long time. I really never heard that word until Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, especially the 2016 campaign and ever since. He talks about this populist movement. And for me, he understands the word very well, so he uses it all the time. For the general public guy, now I've been involved in politics and I have a perception of it. Imagine somebody who has never been involved and they hear that word. Populist, popular, what's popular? The reason why I have a problem with that is what's popular today won't be popular tomorrow. And it reeks to me of the word democracy, which we are not a democracy. We'll dig into that in future shows. Democracy is rule by majority, which we're not. Don't get me started on that. Democracy is where the majority of the people determine the rights of everybody. for the common good, as it says down here, a believer in rights, wisdom, virtues of the common people. Well, if the common people are all corrupt, and if the common people, if the majority of people are screwed up and they're evil and they either are corruption or they tolerate corruption, then I don't want anything to do with populist. I'd rather have a strong framework of what is moral and what is right, what is virtuous. So that's kind of why I have an issue with the word populist. But then when you hear people talk about it, they talk about a nationalist populist, or nationalism. Nationalism. I understand the idea of it, though, however. Exalting one nation above all others. And this is kind of the America First policy, or America First platform. You can't help other countries if you don't take care of your own country. How are we going to donate and support other countries with trillions of dollars when we're $28 trillion in a national debt with over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities? You can't help others unless you take care of yourself first and then become strong and then take care of others. So exalting one nation above, and in trade policies, all this, why would you have a policy that just screws your own American people time and time and time again, year after year? So I understand nationalism. I understand America First. That's probably why they call America First, but the media, they try to confuse all these. And I hope you see what I'm painting, the picture I'm painting here, because now you got white nationalists. Why do they call them white nationalists? Because they're trying to confuse you and bleed over with the words of nationalism, populist nationalist, America First. That's what they're doing. Because what is a white nationalist? Militant whites who espouse white supremacy. Why don't they just call them white supremacists? They don't. They call them white nationalists. Why? Because they're trying to confuse the definitions and the connotations that people have. And it also says advocate of enforced racial segregation in this definition of white nationalist. Enforced racial segregation. That's using government. There's government control there. It's a white nationalist. But here's what they do. Look at down at the bottom. They just use a pull quote. They just pull a quote somewhere that used the word white nationalist in a sentence. And the sentence they use comes from the Phoenix Business Journal in 2006. And it says, ... a far-right platform that includes white nationalism in opposition to Israel. Well, wait a minute. A far-right platform. Far-right, again, is 0% government control, right? Which is anarchy. And then you got libertarian, conservatives that are far. So you're trying to say that using forced segregation through government policy and government action is a far-right platform? It doesn't jive. But you see how they're trying to paint the picture. If you're on the far right, if you believe in limited government, then you must be associated with white supremacy. That's what they're trying to say. And alt-right, that term really popped up a lot in the last few years. Alt-right or alternative right is a loosely defined group of people with far-right ideologies. Far-right. So they try to, look at the second line there, white supremacists, right? Far-right. And then down at the very bottom, well, actually that second paragraph, alt-right beliefs have been described as isolationist, protectionist, blah, 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 saying all these things. So if you're an isolationist, if you're a protectionist, which they try to label Donald Trump as, right? They try to label Ron Paul that way years ago. And at the end of that paragraph, it says, and the 2016 presidential campaign of Donald Trump, alt-right, white supremacists. You see how they're blurring all these different things? Let's look at a couple examples. Actually, if you go to Google, for some reason, if you search on the news tab, far left, you get about 1,090,000 results if you search far left in the news. Do you not take a guess how many search results you'll get if you search far right? It's over 10 million. So the news uses the label far right 10-1 over using the label far left, and they're doing it to paint a picture. Because middle America, I'm not an extremist, I'm a moderate, I don't believe in extreme views, I'm not on the far right. So if they say far right, then the person's going to, reading that article, is just going to dismiss them. And here's an article. U.S. steps up pursuit of far-right activists in 2016 voter suppression probe. This is actually recent, just the other day. steps up pursuit of far-right activists. Now, when you read this article, nothing in the article defines far-right. Nothing in the article discusses the person's political views so you even know where they show up on the political spectrum. They just put this label in the headline so you immediately, in your mind, you're triggered to, you have this perception of they're far right. Ooh, they're an activist. If you're not an activist, what are you? A pacifist? You're not active? You're not actively engaged in the political process? Everybody should be an activist, by the way. Everybody should be active. But they say it's a far-right activist, but nowhere in the article do they actually describe any of the political ideologies or beliefs. Far-right. The only far-right, the farthest of the right that I would disagree with, that I would have a problem with, would be 0% government control, anarchy. I don't believe in that, right? So, but everything else, libertarian, we can have some conversations. Conservatives, let's have some conversations. You get past the Constitution to the left, advocating more government control over our lives, we're going to have a problem. Here's one just the other day. Right wing's misplaced mania over COVID origin story. Because this is heating up. Chris Hayes on the right wing's misplaced mania over COVID origin story. The right wing media, right? Give me a break. This is how they paint the picture. Oh, so if you're questioning the origin of COVID from the lab, you must be right wing, and therefore we must dismiss you. Here's one. Right-wing doctors are suing to block COVID vaccines for kids. Right-wing doctors. Well, who are these doctors? They could have had the exact same article about the exact same topic, and the headline could have been, board-certified MDs are suing to block COVID vaccine for kids. If that was the headline, what's the connotation? What are you thinking? What's the perception of the doctors in the article and the topic at hand, COVID vaccine for kids? You would probably take it seriously. Board-certified MDs who have successfully treated hundreds of patients, hundreds of COVID patients, are suing to block. Really? Wow, credibility. Doctors, board certified, who have seen hundreds of patients and successfully treated them who had COVID, they are suing to block COVID vaccines. I would take that seriously. But this article says right-wing doctors. Do you see what they do? See the games they play? Here's another one. Tackling the U.S. military's extremism problem. What's the first sentence? Following the January 6th insurrection Okay, here we go. The military's extremism problem. So you're saying that the January 6th, and again, the picture they're trying to paint to January 6th is that it was all and only Donald Trump supporters, and so they must be extremists, and so therefore they're trying to create this wedge between middle America and regular folks against them. They're trying to get Donald Trump supporters, they're trying to loop all of Donald Trump supporters into extremism, far-right, insurrectionists. They stormed. I saw one guy the other day is comparing January 6th insurrection to 9/11. Oh my gosh! Now you're getting me started. All right, guys. I thank you so much for tuning in on this. I'd love to get your feedback on this. Again, go to jasonwhoit.com/004 to get this show's episode. Leave me a comment. I'd love to get your feedback on this. I hope this helps. I hope this offered some clarity. I want you to be able to read these articles like this and to not fall for the garbage. And I know that some of your friends and family are going to see this and they don't have these definitions. They don't have these things nailed down. And so they're going to fall for the picture the media is trying to paint and to dismiss people. And if we don't understand the terms, it's the language. We're just not connecting. There's confusion. And it's by design. It's by design. And again, the degree to which you measure government control over people's rights, over property, over the economy, over institutions, that's what we're talking about. So the more and more and more people are to the left of the Constitution, the more they are against the very foundational paper that created this country. One of them, in addition to the Declaration of Independence. Anyways, God